What's up guys, Vulkan here, and today we are doing a full recap of the Remnant stream from a few days ago. It was supposed to go for an hour, but ended up going for 3 hours to show off survival mode and a ton of new content. There was so much revealed, just tons revealed. There was a new dungeon, a new boss, new gear, weapons. They either shown like off during the stream or they clicked on them quickly so we could screenshot them and talk about them later. So one thing to keep in mind, this stream was all about the new survival mode, and next week there will be a stream to show off the new courses, story areas. So everything in this video is going to be survival mode, pretty much straightforward and only that. But before we dive into the recap, I did want to remind everyone what is coming with the DLC because there's a lot of confusion there, and they did clear a lot of this up. So the new DLC will bring new bosses, dungeons, new gear, new weapons, a new survival mode, courses added to the adventure mode, and a new gear skins currency and vendor. Now, the survival mode, gear skins, and courses adventure mode are all part of the paid DLC, and that has to be purchased for $9.99 before you can play those modes. The other stuff is coming for free. So free players will get the new bosses, new dungeons, some of the new gear, and some of the new weapons. It all depends on what you're getting and where you're getting it. So because there was so much revealed in this video, I'm going to try not to drag this video out for the sake of it, and I want to get to the important things and get you guys in and out of here. So let's get started with what we learned. First, we found out that console release is being delayed by something completely out of their control, or else it would have launched alongside PC. So for you console players out there, hopefully this isn't the norm. I'm assuming and pretty sure it's related to the certification process and the global pandemic going on right now. So that's kind of pushing a lot of things back. Anyway, getting into this, I did want to start with how survival mode actually worked, because there's a lot of questions around that. There's a lot of confusion for myself. And then afterwards, I want to show some of the new items. Now, you begin the game by launching your character like you would normally. So you launch Remnant, you choose your character, you go into War 13, or Town as people call it, you touch the World Stone, and there is a survival mode there that you click on. At that point, you're whisked off to the Labyrinth. So you're sent off to a brand new hub, and this hub is for each survival mode run. Here you're going to have 5 pillars, and these pillars are all vendors of a different category, right? So you're going to have one for weapons, one for gear, trinkets, Dragonheart charges, one for consumables. But the Dragonheart charges and the consumables vendors, those ones are not going to change because they offer specific things. But the gear, weapon, and trinket vendors will all change each time you visit them. It's going to give you a random assortment of items each time you visit. Now, you can't sit there and like click on, click off, and then click on and to refresh it. It's only when you revisit the labyrinth, whether you die or if you kill a boss. So you have to actually, leave the instance and then come back in order to get a new assortment of items. So I guess you probably could quit the game and then relaunch it if you don't like what you get, but I mean, that kind of ruins the whole point of survival mode. You're supposed to roll with what you get and be able to adapt. So for instance, just kind of give you guys an example, the weapons vendor could offer a beam rifle, a Chicago typewriter, a defiler, and a hunting rifle the first time you visit. But after you die, you complete a run, you kill a boss, it's going to offer something completely different. Now this goes for gear and trinket vendors as well, so remember to always check those. Now, survival mode, you're going to begin completely naked with a pistol and 1,000 scrap to purchase items with. And just as a heads up, so your scrap currency, 1,000, isn't going to come close enough to buy a piece for each slot. Long guns are 500 scrap, gear ranges from 400 to 500, trinkets range from 350 to 400. So you have enough basically to buy a piece of gear and a long gun, which was the dev's recommendation, by the way, if you want to have a good start, because long gun, you need that. Pistol's not going to get you too far. You're going to run out of ammo. And then from an armor perspective, you need the armor, right? You need the protection in order to withstand some attacks. Now you've purchased your gear, right? You went through, you purchased all your gear, you're ready to go. You touch the world stone in the center. It's like a black, corrupted world stone, and you're sent off to a random biome. And once in, you're going to see a new interface in the upper left-hand corner. And this is the new survival mode interface. It shows you a timer as the red bar, your player level as the blue bar, and then your scrap. And next to all that is like a skull with a number in it. This is how many bosses that you've killed. And there's a total of 30 bosses in the game, so if you get through all 30 bosses, then you can start seeing repeat bosses. Beyond that, you should not see the same boss in the same run. Now, a lot of people probably saw the timer, and they're like, oh god, I don't want a time mode, I don't want to like race against the clock, where you lose. It's not that style of timer, right? So it's not when the timer hits 0, you're out of time, you lose, you go back to the labyrinth. This is rather the rate that the enemies will level up. So once the timer hits 0, the enemies will move up a level and become stronger. And the entire point of survival mode is to stay ahead of the curve and always stay a few levels ahead of the enemies to keep a damage buff that you have up. And at level 1, you actually have a 50% increased damage buff. But as enemies gain levels on you, that buff will weaken and it'll lower. But as you level up, you regain some of that buff and are automatically given extra points into health, stamina, and damage. So you always want to be out killing things that we can kind of get your experience up. When I was watching the stream, Sofetch was playing and he was typically 1 or 2 levels above everything else, and he was able to kind of keep that damage buff up. It didn't seem overly difficult to keep that up, but at the same time, we didn't get too far into like bosses and things like that. We saw like 1 or 2 boss kills, and I'm curious to see how it is at like 15 or 16 bosses in, if you're going to be, 5 or 6 levels below the enemies, how that's going to kind of all work. But one thing that they did show off on stream is that when you kill a boss, the clock itself loses 1 minute and 30 seconds, which allows enemies to catch up and keep things interesting. Because if they didn't have this, typically I was watching the stream and they were able to kill bosses and still had like 3 minutes left on the timer before they're going to get a level, and they're already 2 levels above. So this kind of keeps it interesting, speeds up the enemy's growth, and allows the mode to remain somewhat difficult. So I did want to talk about one big change in survival mode that they pointed out. They completely removed world stones as checkpoints, which means you can't refresh your ammo, your health, anything like that. Typically you're working through story, things like that. You'll come across a world stone as a checkpoint. You can touch it and it'll refresh everything you have and you're good to go. In survival, that's not the case. The only stone is at the actual end of a run after the boss. So there's not a checkpoint before the boss, nothing like that. You need to manage that stuff yourself. The stone you use to get there, right, at the very beginning, it breaks when you arrive, so you can't use that one to backtrack and refresh or anything like that. The only way to get health back is either through items, or when you level up, you get pushed back to full health, but beyond that, you have to manage it all of yourself. In the survival mode world that you get put into, your entire goal is to search for loot, explore side dungeons, kill enemies along the way for experience, and then fight the mini-boss. After your first boss kill, you get scrap, you get a new piece of gear depending on what boss you killed, and that's a good note. If you kill a boss, you get whatever item they typically drop. So if you're fighting like Singe, the world boss, and you want to get Smolder the sword, then you shoot his tail and you get Smolder. If you just kill him, then you get the submachine gun, Spitfire, automatically with no crafting. So there's no crafting involved in survival mode at all, you just get the thing. So after you kill the boss, you're sent back to the hub, and after you kill your first boss, you also get an additional 250 scrap to start off with. So if you die, you start off with 1,250 scrap instead of 1,000 to give you a little bit extra boost, things like that. And this goes up by 50 each boss that you kill, so typically you can start off with a pretty decent chunk if you can progress further and further and further. If you leave the game and like shut down Remnant and you're gone for the day, and you come back and you want to play some more, this resets. So your progress doesn't save, and that goes with survival mode as a whole. So if you're on, boss 14 and you leave and come back, you're a boss 0. There's no saving in between runs. And back at the hub, right, you take this scrap, you buy more stuff, and then you jump into the next world. And you're stronger, your enemies are stronger. You fight another mini boss, but after that you fight a world boss. So it always goes mini boss, then mini boss, then world boss, and it just repeats like that until you've been through all of the bosses. So one big thing you're probably wondering, as I was, do you only get gear from vendors? Is it just you go out, you get scrap, you come back, you buy things from vendors? Well, luckily, actually out in the world, you're going to discover loot crates, dead bodies, and trait books. And the loot crates in survival mode will always guarantee a purple item. Always. And you get some extra money. The dead bodies, they will always drop a purple item that's from the world that you're currently in. So if you find a dead body on Earth, then you get an Earth drop. If you find a dead body on Geisha, you get a Geisha drop. So it kind of creates this risk versus reward, right? Do you want to explore and potentially die early and into your run, but you could find some really great loot? Or do you want to just try to zerg the bosses to get some extra scrap to buy the loot from the vendors, but keep your runs fairly short? So it's really an interesting kind of process. I like it. I think they did a really good job with that. Now, traits do work a little bit differently in survival mode because they are way stronger than the typical traits that we're used to. You can find them out in the wild. You can purchase random traits from the Dragonheart vendor in the labyrinth. And as you collect them, they actually start to accumulate along the bottom of the screen. So you'll see like little icons. And if you ever get a duplicate, it'll level up that trait instead. So if you have like a trigger happy trait, for instance, and you find another one, instead of having 2 trigger happy traits, or it being wasted and turned into scrap, it actually levels up your trigger happy trait from level 1 to level 2, then 3, then 4, and it increases in effectiveness quite a bit. They did make mention that these traits are much stronger than these story ones. So this is probably a good time to mention that survival mode actually has a separate tuning from the regular game modes. So all of the traits, stats, some of the gear has been reworked for this mode specifically to be more effective or to work a little bit differently. So that is something you can see in the beginning of all the text. It'll say survival : or in parentheses after the item name, it'll say survival mode. And that means it's a specific item to that. So try not to compare between story and this one. So that's pretty much how survival mode works, right? You buy some starting gear, jump into a random world, get as far as you can while trying to keep your level above the enemies, kill the boss, and become stronger for the next run. If you die, you lose everything, you start all the way over again, but if you manage to kill a boss, then you'll start with more money, like I mentioned, so you can become stronger and stronger and stronger. This also, they pointed out, and I think it's a really good thing to point out, is some of these items that really got looked over in story mode, things like experience gain items, become incredibly powerful because that gives you extra experience to stay ahead of the leveling curve. So it's not a direct damage item, but keeping you a level above, it becomes a damage item. And that's something that is really going to be interesting to see how the community takes these items and molds them together to form the optimal kind of set or build for survival mode runs. Now, I did want to show off some of the new items we got to see in the stream. This isn't all of the fresh items, all of the new things, but these are some of the ones that I felt were really impactful. So right out of the gate, we got to see Hero Sword. And I mean right out of the gate. The first time they opened up the vendor, the Hero Sword is a reworked Adventurer's Sword, which this is the sword you very first start off with, so in the tutorial, and it becomes shattered and you don't get any more when you begin the game. Lots of people have been asking for this one, including myself. I've been, when are we going to get the Adventurer's Sword back? And they did add it. We don't know how you unlock it in the game. However, we do know it is here, it's in the game, and it has a new perk. And the perk is called Energy Wave. So charge attacks release an extended energy wave, allowing the wielder to strike enemies from farther away. So basically, when you're doing your combos and you're charging your things up, you can actually swing your blade and it'll launch a energy wave out, hitting enemies. Next up, we have Compulsion Loop, which increases your movement speed, fire rate, and melee speed for 5 seconds after getting a kill. So basically, it's like a killing frenzy, kind of serial killer style ring. You put this sucker on, you kill something, and you just keep that momentum up, right? It's an incentive to continue killing, but you have to also be warned, don't push too far or else you'll die, and that's bad. Next up, we have the Stockpile Circlet. This was a highly requested item for people who wanted more maximum ammo to haul around, so it increases your max ammo reserves for all your firearms by 30%, which is a great thing for people who just want to shoot stuff and not worry about melee weapons. Next, we have Black Rose, which is incredibly powerful because it allows you to gain a 3-piece bonus with only 2 pieces. So you can have more bonuses going, right? You can have a 3-piece bonus plus 2 1-piece bonuses, or a 2-piece bonus plus a 3-piece bonus. So there's all sorts of cool stuff you can do with this. I'm super excited for it, and I think it's going to be one of those must-have type of items early on, and potentially into endgame. Then you have the Seeker mod, which summons a beetle that rushes towards enemies and explodes, dealing corrosive damage. You can have a maximum of 5 beetles up for 30 seconds, so we're seeing more and more summons, so you can create almost like a summon style build, which is pretty cool. And lastly, we get to see Labyrinth Armor, which Labyrinth Armor increases your total weapon mod damage by 15% baseline, and then pulls scrap and iron towards you. And the 3-piece is pretty badass because it gives you 50% increased mod damage. And I'm very curious to know where we get this, because if we get it from the keeper of the labyrinth, does that mean we have to fight him, or is it given as a gift if we end up doing something? Kind of like with the Queen of the Iskall, where we give her the heart and she gives us a set of armor plus a crossbow. So there's kind of an interesting thing here. I don't think we'll fight the Keeper personally. I think he would be a little too powerful to fight, but I don't know. Very interesting. I really, really like this though. So that wraps up everything we have for today, guys. But next week, we'll get to see some new story stuff, hopefully some new bosses, new dungeons, things like that. But I want to know, what are you most looking forward to? Survival mode, story mode, or do you not care? Are you excited? Are you bummed out by this new DLC? I really want to hear from you guys. But as always, this has been Vulkan, and I'll talk to you guys next time.